Chapter 5. As Hopper packed, her eye fell on the little globe she'd kept, one of the presents David had given her on their wedding day as a joke, and she couldn't help her thoughts turning to the whole slow again. When the Earth had finally stopped turning 30 years ago, there had been no single moment of epiphany, no final report of the time and date. The exact moment of the stop was lost in the chaos of events. It took a fortnight for most people to realize the sun's new place in the sky was its final home. It was hardly unexpected. The initial discovery that the Earth's orbit had started winding down had come almost a decade earlier. The stop was merely the final confirmation that the Earth and the sun were now in almost perfect lockstep, as the moon was with the Earth. The first day of slowing had been 5 years before Hopper was born, but she'd read several histories. It had come in late May 2020. That day, shortly before noon, a series of catastrophic, inexplicable failures in GPS occurred across the planet. Online maps crumpled, satellites missed messages from the ground, were reduced to multi-million-dollar ornaments barreling across the sky, winking down in sly acknowledgement of some big cosmic joke. Defense systems bucked in ways baffling and unnerving to their operators. The failures threw cities, ports, flights into gridlock. Shipping deliveries were suddenly disarrayed. Planes circled helpless above the world's airports. Charges were leveled against a broad and incompatible range of suspects: the Russians, the Chinese, the North Koreans, anti-Western hackers, anti-development Westerners, Apple, Google, Davos, Goldman Sachs. None of the explanations accounted for the fact that every country in the world had been affected by the disaster. The next day, an underground laboratory beneath the forests of Germany, home to a device called a ring laser gyroscope, which measured the planet's spin, confirmed the Earth had added 0.144 seconds from the 86,400, making up a day. The planet's GPS systems, so brilliant and exact, had collapsed in the face of even this tiny imprecision. The next day, the planet had gained twice as much again. The following day, 3 times as much as that. The problems of the first day were patched. The internet still worked, after all. The filigree of undersea cables wrapping the planet remained unharmed. Paper maps were dug out of storage. Sailors began using old navigational tools once again. The world assumed the problem would be solved, that the sextants could be discarded before long. This was a glitch. And yet it kept happening, the deceleration increasing just a little each day. The search for a cause in the heavens had begun immediately. It had long been known that the Earth's rotation was slowed down fractionally by the friction of the moon's pull and the loss of momentum as the Earth's oceans crashed into its continents. The rate of slow had been tiny, milliseconds per century, but it was real. So it followed that a change thousands of times larger must be caused by something in the skies. The world's observatories adjusted their focus, looking for any near-Earth objects that might explain the deceleration. Countless theories were proposed and tested: the Milky Way's spin slowing down, a black hole, the region of the galaxy the planet was passing through. One by one, they were junked. The search was made harder by the very symptoms under investigation. The slow of the planet's spin had thrown all celestial calculations out of kilter. One astronomer compared the hunt to going fishing by sticking one's head into the ocean with a torch in one's mouth. For months, nothing was found. There seemed to be no scapegoat. The anger turned temporarily inwards. A few anti-science marches took place. A few observatories were torched. But by that point, most people were transferring their attention to other problems. Eventually, the cause was discovered. A white dwarf star, a rare celestial creature the size of Earth but 200,000 times as dense, loosed from its own star system by a supernova explosion, now free to barrel through space, disrupting everything in its path. It was travelling at 2,000 kilometres a second through this part of the Milky Way, its trajectory and enormous gravity dragging the Earth slowly backwards, its path as perfect as if it had been designed by some malign heavenly committee. It was already millions of kilometres away by the time it was spotted, speeding from the wreckage, its damage done. Hopper often wondered what might have happened had they found the rogue star in time, whether they could have made some hopeless attempt to blow it out of the sky, to cancel the end of the world. It didn't matter now. The final flare of interest in the heavens had come with the uncertainty over whether the Earth would stop spinning completely, meaning it would experience one day and night each year as it circled the sun, or whether it would simply drift into lockstep, as the moon was with the Earth, always showing the sun the same face. There had been a final flourish of international cooperation when it seemed the world might end up with 6-month days and nights. Promises of food supplies shipped back and forth, a grand new planetary bargain, a dawning era of global collaboration as never seen before. And then it had become clear that the alternative was far likelier. The new barriers of daylight and darkness were being established in perpetuity. Overnight, alliances that had lasted centuries collapsed. The relationships shared at half a planet's distance, the web of connections promoting ideology above latitude, all came to an abrupt stop. Geography became the only factor affecting a nation's prospects. Australia's national interests were now diametrically opposed to those of Britain. Pakistan and India were shocked into rapprochement. Different nations adjusted to the news at different speeds. The two Koreas reached a fragile accord just 6 months before they were plunged into darkness for the last time, and weeks before the governments of both nations ceased to function. There were no tearful reunions, no hauling down of flags. By the time of the stop, plenty of nations had stopped hauling flags up in the first place. 3 years before the stop, the internet had slowly shut down. The servers around the world were no longer maintained. The undersea cables ground to a sludgy halt. Then mobile phones had stopped working. Televisions had flickered and frozen. Mankind was being rapidly catapulted back through all the advances of the previous century. Diseases had resurfaced too. Smallpox, freshly thawed from the Siberian permafrost, and others less baroque, but no less fatal. The satellite network ringing the Earth had collapsed amid the chaos, another totemic achievement of mankind abandoned, superseded by the need to feed a population. Some had smashed into each other, reduced to thousands of lethal shards of debris. Perhaps a few were still in their old orbits, useless hunks of metal these days, passing overhead a dozen times a day, frying and freezing alternately. There was no prospect of escape. The technologists who had predicted fleeing the Earth for more habitable zones had been wrong to a man. There was no time to do anything but mothball the International Space Station, no secret fund to strike out for a new planet as this one collapsed. Around the edges of the continental plates, the planet's fragile skin had ruptured in response to this insult from the heavens. Earthquakes shook and reshook the planet as it slowed. Fissures and wheels broke out across the Earth's face. Volcanic eruptions darkened the skies across thousands of miles. The world was swept with gales across its surface as the air currents wrapping the planet collapsed. Gravity had stayed functioning, despite some people's fears. The planet was still the same mass, still exerted gravitational force, but the final years of slowing had been torment. The last night had lasted 6 months in Britain, half an old year of madness and mayhem and near starvation in the dark. And then, agonizingly slowly, the sun had crawled back into the sky as the planet cruised to a stop. the boundaries of day and night locked forever. The dawning of the last day, they'd called it. The year was 2029. Now, 30 years on, here the planet hung in space, making one lazy revolution for each orbit around the sun. Thanks to the tilt of its axis, there was a slight variation in its exact position, so a slender ring of borderlands varied between total darkness and a fractional glimpse of the light. Even so, for the vast majority of the world, the situation was fixed. Enjoying the constant light of the sun, Europe, half of Russia, much of Africa, the Middle East, the eastern edge of North America, and the top of South America. The centre of that zone, meltingly hot, full of ash and the remains of cities. On the very edge, in the cool area bisecting the Indian subcontinent, Eurasia and the Americas, sunlight so weak no human life could survive. Between the two, a slim band where one could still raise a crop, still pretend one lived in a country. And on the other side, darkness.